Blood trickled down Zachariah Owens' chin as he staggered into Pearl's saloon. His normally cocksure grin split in two by a fresh wound that stretched from the corner of his mouth to just below his cheekbone. The evening crowd parted as he moved through the smoky haze, whiskey-soaked floorboards creaking beneath his mud-caked boots. It was 1887, and Copper Creek, Colorado was experiencing the kind of summer where the heat seemed to amplify every grudge, every sideways glance, and every unspoken desire that smoldered beneath the town's respectable veneer. Prudence Norwood looked up from behind the bar counter, her practiced smile faltering at the sight of Zach's bloodied face. She set down the glass she'd been polishing and grabbed a clean cloth, making her way around the counter with the efficiency of someone who had tended to her share of wounded men. "Let me guess," she said, gesturing to a chair. "The O'Malley brothers finally caught up with you." Zach remained standing, his fingers gingerly touching the split lip. "I started it," he admitted, his voice rough from dust and pain. Prudence narrowed her eyes, studying the wound. "And I'm ending it. Sit down," she commanded, pointing to the chair with such authority that several nearby patrons unconsciously straightened their posture. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Zach obeyed, sinking into the wooden chair as Prudence dipped the cloth into a pitcher of clean water. "Doc Simmons isn't in town until tomorrow," she said, carefully dabbing at his lip. "But this isn't your first split lip, is it, Mr. Owens?" "Sixth by my count," he replied, wincing as the cool cloth touched his wound. Though none delivered with quite the same enthusiasm as young Patrick O'Malley's, Prudence shook her head. What was it this time, cards, a horse, or was it Leela Jenkins again? Zach's eyes, the color of a summer thunderstorm, met hers. "None of the above, Miss Norwood. It was about you, actually." The saloon seemed to quiet around them, though perhaps it was just Prudence's imagination. She'd been in Copper Creek for 8 months, having arrived from Boston after her father's business collapsed and left their family destitute. Pearl's saloon had been the only establishment willing to hire a woman with no experience, but a desperate need for wages to send back east to her ailing mother. "Me?" she asked, her voice betraying more surprise than she intended. "I don't recall asking anyone to fight on my behalf, least of all you." Zach's smile widened, then he grimaced as the movement reopened his wound. "Patrick suggested that your virtue was negotiable. I suggested he reconsider his position. He reconsidered it directly onto my face." Prudence pressed the cloth more firmly against his lip, causing him to flinch. "I can handle gossip without you playing the gallant, Mr. Owens. I've been doing it since the day I arrived." "I don't doubt it," Zach replied, his voice softer. "But my mama raised me better than to stand by while a lady's honor is questioned, even if that lady considers me the town's most incorrigible nuisance." "Is that what I consider you?" Prudence asked, a hint of amusement in her green eyes. "Your exact words last month were the most insufferable man to ever don a pair of spurs, if I recall correctly." Prudence couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her lips. "You do recall correctly, Mr. Owens. It was after you started that ridiculous brawl over a game of checkers." "The man was cheating," Zach protested. "He was 12 years old, which makes it all the more important to correct such behavior early." Prudence shook her head as she finished cleaning his wound. "You'll need stitches if you want this to heal properly. It's going to leave a scar either way." Zach caught her wrist as she pulled away, his touch gentle but firm. "Some things are worth the scars, Miss Norwood." Their eyes held for a moment longer than propriety allowed, and Prudence felt a warmth creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the summer heat or the crowded saloon. "Stay put," she said, pulling her hand away. "I'll fetch my sewing kit." As she walked toward the stairs that led to her small room above the saloon, Prudence tried to ignore the whispers that followed her. She knew what they said about her: a single woman working in a saloon might as well hang a sign around her neck advertising her supposed availability. It didn't matter that Pearl Hawkins ran a respectable establishment where the girls served drinks and nothing more, or that Prudence had never so much as kissed a man in Copper Creek. When she returned with her sewing supplies, Zach was still sitting where she'd left him, though he'd acquired a glass of whiskey in her absence. "Liquid courage?" she asked, threading a needle. "Medicine," he corrected, downing the amber liquid in a single swallow. "Though I'd rather have your smile as anesthetic." "You'll have to make do with whiskey," Prudence replied, trying to ignore the way her heart quickened at his words. "Now hold still." She worked in silence, her fingers steady as she stitched his torn flesh. Zach didn't flinch, though she knew each prick of the needle must have been painful. His eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made it difficult to concentrate. "There," she said finally, cutting the thread. "6 stitches should hold it together, provided you refrain from smiling too broadly or picking any more fights over my supposed honor." "I make no promises on either count," Zach replied, his fingers grazing the neat line of stitches. "You've got a steady hand, Miss Norwood." "My father insisted I learn needlework, though I doubt this is what he had in mind." Zach leaned forward slightly. "What did he have in mind for you? A wealthy Boston husband, a house full of servants?" Prudence began packing away her supplies, avoiding his gaze. "Once, perhaps. But dreams change when necessity dictates." "And what are your dreams now?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Before she could answer, the saloon doors burst open and Patrick O'Malley stumbled in, flanked by his 2 older brothers. His right eye was swollen shut, evidence of Zach's retaliation, and his face was flushed with anger and alcohol. "There's the son of a," Patrick began, but his eldest brother, Sean, cut him off with a hand on his shoulder. "We ain't here for more trouble," Sean called out, his Irish accent thickening as it always did when tension rose. "Just want a word with Owens." Zach stood slowly, positioning himself between Prudence and the O'Malley brothers. "I believe we've said all that needs saying, Sean. Your brother insulted a lady and I corrected him. Seems we're even," he added, gesturing to his stitched lip and Patrick's blackened eye. "Not quite even," Patrick spat, shrugging off his brother's restraining hand. "You broke my tooth." "Consider it a fair trade for my split lip," Zach replied calmly. "Unless you'd like to try for a matched set." Prudence stepped forward, placing herself between the men. "That's enough," she said firmly. "Mr. O'Malley, I suggest you and your brothers enjoy your drinks at the Silver Dollar tonight. Mr. Owens was just leaving." She turned to Zach, her expression brooking no argument. "Weren't you, Mr. Owens?" Zach looked from Prudence to the O'Malleys and back, then nodded slowly. "I suppose I was at that." He reached for his hat, then seemed to remember something. "But I've yet to pay Miss Norwood for her medical services." "Consider it payment for you defending my non-existent honor," Prudence replied dryly. "Now go, before you bleed on any more of Pearl's furniture." Zach placed his hat on his head, tipped it slightly in Prudence's direction, and strode past the O'Malleys without a backward glance. The brothers watched him leave, then turned their attention to the bar, apparently deciding that a drink at Pearl's was worth the tension. Prudence returned to her post behind the counter, trying to ignore the curious glances from the other patrons. It wasn't the first time Zachariah Owens had disrupted her evening, and she doubted it would be the last. The man seemed to attract trouble like honey attracted flies. What bothered her more than the disruption was the way her pulse still raced, hours after Zach had left. As she lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the sounds of the saloon below as Pearls closed for the evening, Prudence found herself tracing the memory of Zach's touch on her wrist, the intensity of his gaze as she stitched his wound. "Foolishness," she whispered to the darkness. Zachariah Owens was exactly the kind of man she'd sworn to avoid, charming, reckless, and entirely too confident in his own appeal. Men like that didn't settle down, didn't build secure futures. And a secure future was precisely what Prudence needed if she ever hoped to bring her mother west. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, it was Zach's storm-gray eyes that followed her into her dreams. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching day. Prudence was up with the sun, helping Pearl prepare for the day ahead. At 45, Pearl Hawkins had seen enough of life to develop a shrewd understanding of people, especially the young woman she'd taken under her wing. "That Owens boy was looking at you different last night," Pearl remarked as they swept the floor. Not like he usually does. Prudence kept her eyes on her broom. I don't know what you mean. Pearl's laugh was like the jingle of the coins she counted each night, bright and knowing. Sure you do, girl. That boy's been sweet on you since you arrived, but last night. Last night he was looking at you like a man who's finally figured something out. The only thing Zachariah Owens has figured out is how to get into fights at an alarming rate, Prudence replied, though she couldn't quite keep the color from rising in her cheeks. Maybe, Pearl conceded. Or maybe he's finally realized that some things are worth fighting for. Before Prudence could respond, the back door opened, and Pearl's husband, Thomas, entered with a crate of supplies. The conversation shifted to inventory and the day's tasks, but Pearl's words lingered in Prudence's mind. It was nearly noon when the door to the saloon opened, admitting a shaft of brilliant sunlight and the tall figure of Zachariah Owens. His lip was swollen, but the stitches were holding, and he'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His usually wild, dark hair was combed back, and he wore a clean shirt beneath his leather vest. Miss Norwood, he said, removing his hat as he approached the bar. I was hoping I might have a word. Prudence set down the glasses she'd been arranging. If it's about your stitches, they appear to be holding nicely. It's not about the stitches, Zach replied, though I'm obliged for your handiwork. I was wondering if you might accompany me to the town social this Saturday evening. The request was so unexpected that Prudence momentarily lost her composure. Pearl needs me here on Saturday, she stammered. No, I don't, Pearl called from across the room, not even pretending she hadn't been listening. In fact, I insist you take the evening off. You've worked every Saturday since you arrived. Zach's face split into a grin, then he winced as the motion pulled at his stitches. Well then, it seems the only obstacle has been removed. What do you say, Miss Norwood? Will you do me the honor? Prudence hesitated. The town social was a respectable event held once a month in the church hall. It was where the decent folk of Copper Creek gathered, not typically the crowd that frequented Pearl's saloon. Her attendance would raise eyebrows, particularly on the arm of Zachariah Owens, whose reputation for impulsiveness was well established. Why? She asked finally. Zach tilted his head. Why what? Why ask me to the social? There are plenty of young ladies in Copper Creek who would be delighted to accompany you. None that I'm interested in, he replied simply. None that can stitch a wound as neatly as you, or stand up to the O'Malley brothers without blinking, or make a man feel like he's been struck by lightning with just a glance. Prudence felt her resolve weakening under the sincerity in his eyes. People will talk. People already talk, Zach countered. Might as well give them something worth talking about, he leaned in slightly. Besides, I've never been one to concern myself with the opinions of others. Have you? Yes, Prudence admitted. I have. My reputation is all I have, Mr. Owens. Then allow me to escort you to a perfectly respectable social gathering where we will behave with impeccable decorum and perhaps improve both our reputations in the process. His eyes twinkled with mischief, or at least not damage them further. Despite herself, Prudence laughed. Very well, Mr. Owens, I accept your invitation. Excellent. Zach's face lit up with genuine pleasure. I'll call for you at 7. He settled his hat back on his head, tipped it to Pearl, and strode out of the saloon with the confident gait of a man who had just won a significant victory. Pearl appeared at Prudence's side as soon as the door closed behind him. Well now, she said, a sly smile on her face, looks like you'll be needing your good dress on Saturday. It's just a social, Pearl, Prudence protested weakly. It doesn't mean anything. Maybe not, Pearl agreed. But it's a start. Saturday evening arrived with uncomfortable swiftness. Prudence stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Her dress, a deep green cotton that she'd carefully preserved since leaving Boston, accentuated her slender figure and brought out the color of her eyes. She'd twisted her auburn hair into a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun, allowing a few curls to frame her face. A knock at her door announced Pearl, who entered with a small wooden box. I have something for you, she said, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver hairpin adorned with a small pearl. It was my mother's. I think it would look lovely with your dress. Oh, Pearl, I couldn't possibly— Hush now, Pearl interrupted, already securing the pin in Prudence's hair. Every woman deserves to feel beautiful, especially when a handsome cowboy comes calling. Prudence touched the pin gently, emotion welling in her throat. Thank you for everything. Pearl patted her cheek affectionately. You're like the daughter I never had, Prudence. Your happiness matters to me. Her expression grew more serious. That Owens boy might be rough around the edges, but I've seen how he looks at you. And more importantly, I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Before Prudence could deny it, there was a commotion from downstairs. Zach had arrived. Taking a deep breath, Prudence descended the stairs, conscious of every eye in the saloon turning toward her. Zach stood near the entrance, hat in hand, wearing a dark suit that transformed him from reckless cowboy to something altogether more dangerous to Prudence's peace of mind. His eyes widened as she approached, and for once, the silver-tongued Zachariah Owens seemed at a loss for words. Miss Norwood, he finally managed, his voice slightly hoarse, words fail me. That must be a first, Prudence replied, though she couldn't help the pleasure that warmed her at his obvious admiration. It is, he agreed with a smile that was careful of his healing lip. But then, you've made a habit of rendering me speechless since the day you arrived in Copper Creek. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Prudence placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. The simple contact sent a current through her that she resolutely tried to ignore. Have her back at her reasonable hour, Pearl called after them as they departed. Yes, madam, Zach replied, with more deference than Prudence had ever heard him use. The evening air was mercifully cooler than the day had been, and stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. As they walked toward the church hall, Prudence was acutely aware of the curious glances they attracted. Zachariah Owens escorting the saloon girl from Boston, it was fodder for gossip that would last for weeks. Are you having second thoughts? Zach asked quietly, seeming to sense her discomfort. Prudence squared her shoulders. No, as you said, people will talk regardless. We might as well give them something worth talking about. Zach's smile was warm with approval. That's the spirit. The social was already in full swing when they arrived. Lanterns illuminated the hall with a golden glow, and a small band played a lively tune while couples danced. Tables laden with food and drink lined one wall, and groups of townspeople stood chatting in clusters around the room. Conversation dimmed noticeably as they entered, and Prudence felt her resolve falter. Then Zach's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, a small gesture of reassurance that gave her the courage to lift her chin and move forward. Miss Norwood, how lovely to see you, greeted Mrs. Abernathy, the minister's wife, with what seemed like genuine pleasure. And Mr. Owens, my goodness, what happened to your poor lip? A misunderstanding that's been resolved, Zach replied smoothly. Miss Norwood was kind enough to tend to it. Well, we're delighted you both could join us this evening, Mrs. Abernathy said, though her eyes kept darting curiously between them. Please help yourselves to refreshments and do join in the dancing. As the evening progressed, Prudence found herself relaxing despite the initial awkwardness. Zach was attentive without being overbearing, engaging her in conversation, introducing her to people she hadn't met during her months in Copper Creek, and even coaxing her onto the dance floor for a waltz. You dance remarkably well for a cowboy, she observed as he guided her through the steps with unexpected grace. My mother insisted that her sons learn the social graces, despite my father's protests, Zach explained. She was determined we wouldn't be complete savages, as she put it. Prudence laughed. She would be proud of your progress, though I suspect the split lip might concern her. Oh, she'd have plenty to say about that, Zach agreed with a rueful smile, but she'd also appreciate why it happened. His expression grew more serious. She always said that a man who won't stand up for what's right isn't much of a man at all. She sounds like a wise woman, Prudence said softly. The wisest, Zach agreed. I lost her 2 years ago to pneumonia. There's not a day goes by I don't think of her. The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Prudence. I'm sorry, she said, meaning it. I know something of that loss. My father passed last year, which is why I came west. My mother is still in Boston, living with my aunt. I send most of what I earn back to help with her care. Zach's hand tightened slightly on her waist. That explains a great deal about you, Miss Norwood. Please, she said impulsively, call me Prudence. After stitching a man's face, it seems silly to stand on formality. His smile was warm. Prudence, then. And I'm Zachariah to my mother and the preacher, but everyone else calls me Zach. Zach, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It suited him strong, direct, unpretentious. The music ended, and Zach reluctantly released her, though his eyes never left her face. Would you like some air? It's getting rather warm in here. Prudence nodded, and he led her outside to the small porch that wrapped around the church hall. The night had fully descended now, the stars brilliant in the clear sky. From inside, the music and laughter continued, but it felt distant here, as if she and Zach existed in a world apart. Thank you for agreeing to come tonight, Zach said, leaning against the porch railing beside her. I've wanted to ask you for months, but never quite found the courage. Prudence turned to him in surprise. You, lacking courage, I find that hard to believe, Zach laughed softly. Different kinds of courage, Prudence. I can face down an angry bull or a man with a gun without much thought, but the possibility of you saying no, that was terrifying. The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. Why me? She asked, echoing her question from days earlier. You could have your pick of any girl in town. Zach was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Do you remember the day you arrived in Copper Creek? He asked finally. Prudence nodded. She wasn't likely to forget the dusty, exhausted journey or the fear that had gripped her as she stepped off the stage coach, alone in a strange town with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and a desperate need for employment. I was standing outside the general store, Zach continued. I watched you step down from that coach, looking tired and a little lost, but with your chin up and your spine straight. Then old Mrs. Guthrie made some comment loud enough for half the street to hear about another loose woman coming to town. And do you know what you did? Prudence winced at the memory. I told her that making assumptions about strangers reflected poorly on her character, not mine, and suggested she direct her energy toward more Christian pursuits. Zach's laugh was warm with admiration. You did indeed. I think half the men on that street fell in love with you right then, myself included. You were fearless. I wasn't fearless, Prudence corrected him. I was terrified, but my father always said that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in the face of it. A wise man, Zach said softly. I wish I could have met him. The simple sincerity of the statement hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to voice. Instead, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the distant music. We should probably return to the social, Prudence said eventually. People will talk. Let them, Zach replied, though he straightened from the railing. But you're right. I promised Pearl I'd have you back at a reasonable hour, and I'd rather not get on her bad side. As they walked back inside, Zach's hand found the small of her back, a gentle pressure that felt both protective and possessive. Prudence found she didn't mind it at all. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of dancing, conversation, and laughter. By the time they left, the initial stiffness of the other townspeople had largely dissolved, though Prudence had no illusions that the gossip would cease entirely. They walked slowly back toward Pearl's, neither seemingly in a hurry to end the evening. When they reached the saloon, Zach stopped at the foot of the steps, turning to face her. I had a wonderful time tonight, he said, his eyes searching hers in the dim light from the saloon windows. As did I, Prudence admitted. Rather more than I expected to. High praise indeed, Zach teased, then grew more serious. Prudence, I'd like to call on you properly if you'll allow it, not just for socials or town gatherings, but to court you as you deserve to be courted. The directness of his request startled her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Zachariah Owens had never been one to approach anything obliquely. My situation is complicated, she began. My obligations to my mother aren't something I'd ever ask you to neglect, Zach interrupted gently. Whatever is between us, it doesn't change your responsibilities, nor would I want it to. It just adds possibilities, possibilities. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and uncertainty. I need time to think, Prudence said finally. Zach nodded, seemingly unsurprised. Of course, I've waited months to ask. I can certainly wait for your answer. He took her hand and, with a formality that would have seemed out of character just days ago, raised it to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. Good night, Prudence. Thank you for a memorable evening. As she watched him walk away down the moonlit street, Prudence touched the back of her hand where his lips had been, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in her carefully ordered world. The next week passed in a whirl of activity at the saloon. A cattle drive had come through Copper Creek, bringing thirsty cowboys and increased business. Prudence was grateful for the distraction, though her thoughts frequently strayed to Zach. He had kept his distance, respecting her request for time to consider his proposal of courtship. She caught glimpses of him around town at the general store, outside the blacksmith's, riding past the saloon on his way to or from his small ranch outside of town. Each time he tipped his hat or offered a smile, but made no attempt to press her for an answer. It was Pearl who finally broke Prudence's contemplative silence on the matter. That boy's showing remarkable restraint, she observed as they prepared for the evening rush. Though I can see it's costing him. Prudence looked up from the glasses she was arranging. What do you mean? Pearl raised an eyebrow. He rides past here at least twice a day, looking like a hound separated from his favorite bone, yet he hasn't set foot inside since the social. She wiped her hands on her apron. So, have you made up your mind, or are you going to torture the poor man indefinitely? I'm not torturing anyone, Prudence protested. I'm being careful. Careful is good, Pearl acknowledged, but sometimes, girl, life doesn't give you the luxury of certainty. Sometimes you have to take a leap and trust that you'll land on your feet, or that someone will be there to catch you if you don't. Before Prudence could respond, the front door opened, admitting not Zach as her traitorous heart had hoped, but Patrick O'Malley, accompanied by a cowboy she didn't recognize. Pearl's expression hardened. I thought I made it clear you weren't welcome here, O'Malley. Patrick held up his hands in a placating gesture. Now, Mrs. Hawkins, surely a man can change his ways. I've come to apologize to Miss Norwood, in fact. His words were conciliatory, but there was something in his eyes that made Prudence uneasy. Is that so? Pearl replied, clearly skeptical. Patrick nodded, his gaze shifting to Prudence. I behaved poorly, Miss Norwood, speaking of you in a manner no gentleman should. I hope you can forgive me. The apology sounded rehearsed and hollow, but Prudence nodded stiffly. Apology accepted, Mr. O'Malley. Will that be all? A flash of anger crossed Patrick's face at her dismissive tone, quickly masked. Actually, I was hoping to buy you a drink, by way of making amends. That won't be necessary, Prudence replied coolly. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do. She turned away, but Patrick moved quickly, grabbing her wrist. Now that's not very friendly, is it? Especially when I'm trying to be polite. Pearl reached beneath the counter where Prudence knew she kept a small derringer, but before she could produce it, the saloon doors swung open again, and Zach strode in, his face darkening as he took in the scene. Problem here? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. Patrick's grip on Prudence's wrist tightened momentarily, then released. No problem, Owens, just having a friendly conversation with Miss Norwood. Didn't look friendly from where I'm standing, Zach replied, moving closer. His stitches had been removed, but the healing split lip was still visible, a reminder of their last confrontation. Well, nobody asked you, did they? Patrick snapped, his companion shifting uncomfortably beside him. Prudence stepped between them, facing Zach. Everything is fine. Mr. O'Malley was just leaving. She turned to Patrick, her voice firm. Weren't you? For a tense moment, it seemed Patrick might refuse, then he shrugged, attempting nonchalance. Sure, place is too quiet anyway. He nodded to his companion and they moved toward the door, but as he passed Zach, Patrick muttered something too low for Prudence to hear. Zach's reaction was immediate. His hand shot out, grabbing Patrick's collar and slamming him against the nearest wall. Care to repeat that? He growled. Zach, don't, Prudence cried, moving toward them. "It's not worth it." "Oh, it is," Zach disagreed, his eyes never leaving Patrick's face. "But not here." He released the other man with a slight push. "If you've got something to say to me, O'Malley, you can say it outside." Patrick straightened his collar, a nasty smile spreading across his face. "Gladly." The two men moved toward the door, Patrick's companion trailing uncertainly behind. Prudence grabbed Zach's arm as he passed. "Please don't do this," she pleaded. "Not again." Zach's expression softened as he looked down at her. "Some things are worth fighting for, Prudence. I believe I've mentioned that before." He gently disengaged her hand. "Don't worry, I'll be careful." She watched helplessly as he followed the O'Malleys outside, the door swinging shut behind them. "Men," Pearl muttered, shaking her head, "always thinking with their fists instead of their brains." Prudence hesitated only a moment before heading for the door. Pearl called after her, but she ignored the older woman, pushing outside into the gathering dusk. The men had moved into the street, where a small crowd was already gathering in anticipation of the fight. Zach and Patrick faced each other, tension radiating between them. Patrick's companion had wisely stepped back, apparently deciding that this was not his quarrel. "Last chance to walk away, Owens," Patrick said, though his eager expression made it clear he hoped Zach would do no such thing. "Funny," Zach replied evenly. "I was about to say the same to you." Patrick lunged forward without warning, his fist connecting with Zach's jaw with an audible impact. Zach staggered back a step but didn't fall. Instead, he shook his head as if clearing it, then moved with the fluid grace that had surprised Prudence on the dance floor. His counterpunch caught Patrick in the stomach, doubling the man over. Before Patrick could recover, Zach delivered a swift uppercut that snapped his head back. Patrick stumbled, nearly falling, then charged forward with a roar of anger, tackling Zach to the ground. The two men rolled in the dust of the street, trading blows. Prudence pushed her way through the growing crowd, her heart in her throat as she watched Zach take a vicious hit to his recently healed lip, reopening the wound. "Stop it," she shouted, but her voice was lost in the excited calls of the spectators. Then, through the crowd, she spotted Sheriff Davis making his way toward the brawl, his expression thunderous. If he arrested Zach, it would be at least a night in jail and a fine the cowboy could ill afford, given what Prudence knew of his modest circumstances. Without stopping to think, she pushed past the remaining onlookers and strode directly into the path of the fighting men. "That is enough," she shouted with all the authority she could muster. Both men froze, looking up at her in surprise from their positions on the ground. Zach was straddling Patrick, fist raised for another blow, blood trickling from his reopened lip. Patrick didn't look much better, with a rapidly swelling eye and a bloodied nose. "Miss Norwood," Sheriff Davis said as he reached them, "I suggest you step back and let me handle this." "There's nothing to handle, Sheriff," Prudence replied firmly. "This was just a misunderstanding between gentlemen, and it's over now." She fixed both men with a stern glare. "Isn't it?" Zach lowered his fist slowly, then stood, offering a hand to Patrick. After a moment's hesitation, Patrick accepted it, allowing Zach to pull him to his feet. "Well," the sheriff pressed, "is the lady right? Is this over?" The two men glanced at each other, then at Prudence. Something in her expression must have communicated the severity of the situation, because both nodded. "Just a disagreement, Sheriff," Zach said, his voice rough. "All settled now." "That right, O'Malley?" the sheriff asked skeptically. Patrick hesitated, then nodded. "All settled." Sheriff Davis looked between them, then at the disappointed crowd. "All right then, show's over. Everyone back to your business." He pointed a warning finger at Zach and Patrick. "I see either of you causing trouble again, you'll spend a week in my jail. Understood?" Both men nodded, and the sheriff moved off, dispersing the remaining onlookers as he went. Patrick's companion appeared at his side, supporting him as they limped away toward the doctor's office. Zach stood in the middle of the street, watching Prudence with an unreadable expression. Blood from his split lip stained his shirt and dust covered his clothing, but his eyes were clear and steady. "That was foolish," he said quietly as she approached, stepping between two fighting men. No more foolish than fighting in the first place, she retorted, pulling her handkerchief from her pocket and pressing it to his bleeding lip. What did he say to you? Zach winced at the pressure on his wound. Nothing worth repeating about me, she guessed. Yes. And you thought punching him would change his mind about me? Zach captured her hand, holding the handkerchief in place himself. No, I thought punching him would make me feel better about him insulting the woman I love. His eyes widened slightly, as if the words had surprised him as much as they had her. Prudence felt her heart stutter in her chest. What did you say? I said, Zach began, then stopped, a rueful smile tugging at his injured lip. I said I love you, Prudence Norwood. I didn't mean to blurt it out like that, covered in dirt in the middle of the street, but there it is. I love you. I think I've loved you since the day you put Mrs. Guthrie in her place. I know I'm not what you expected, or maybe even what you want, but Prudence silenced him the only way she could think of, rising on her toes to press her lips gently to his uninjured side of his mouth. It was a brief kiss, chaste by most standards, but it effectively stopped his words. When she pulled back, Zach was looking at her with such naked hope and wonder that it made her breath catch. I've made up my mind, she said softly, about your courtship, and, he prompted when she didn't immediately continue. Yes, she said simply, my answer is yes. The smile that broke across Zach's face was worth the reopened wound it caused. He wrapped his free arm around her waist, pulling her closer. I'll make you proud, Prudence, I swear it. You already do, she replied, meaning it, but perhaps we could work on resolving conflicts without bloodshed. Zach laughed, the sound warm and full of promise. For you, I'll try, though I can't promise complete success. Some habits are hard to break. I suppose I'll have to be satisfied with progress rather than perfection, Prudence conceded, smiling up at him. Now come inside and let me see to that lip again. I'm getting quite skilled at patching you up. A useful skill in a wife, Zach observed casually, his eyes twinkling at her sharp intake of breath. Not that I'm proposing. Yet. I believe in doing things properly, and proper courtship comes before proper proposals. Very sensible of you, Mr. Owens, Prudence replied, trying to sound composed despite the flutter of her heart at the implication of his words. As they walked back toward Pearl's saloon, Zach's arm around her waist and the setting sun painting the town in shades of gold and amber, Prudence thought about the unexpected turns her life had taken. From Boston society to a saloon in Copper Creek, from secure plans to uncertain future. Yet for the first time since her father's death, the uncertainty didn't frighten her, because some things, as Zachariah Owens had so persistently reminded her, were worth the risk. And as she felt the steady warmth of him beside her, Prudence knew without doubt that he was one of them.